She was trespassing on association space. Remove her right now. That's exactly what Karen Whitlock screamed across my driveway, while my 13-year-old daughter held her wrist against the fence rail, trying to steady herself after being shoved. The clipboard queen didn't even blink when she saw the scrapes forming. She just pointed to the cracked picket like she was pointing to a crime scene she'd personally uncovered. "You don't have authority over a public easement," I told the officer of rules, calm and flat, because panic would have given her victory. What she didn't know was that my brother signed off on every juvenile admission request in our state. One violent incident, one formal evaluation, and her son's little empire of private school trophies would look very different behind secure glass. I know you're watching this wondering how any mother could justify what happened to my child. Where are you watching from? If you're a parent who's ever felt cornered by someone who thinks a policy overrides decency, then keep listening, because what came next forced me to question every belief I had about safety, community, and who actually holds power. I'm Daniel Reeves, former juvenile rehabilitation liaison for Fairfax County, and currently serving as a community crisis advocate. It sounds complicated, but it's simple. I've spent years studying violent youth behavior and how early interventions determine entire futures. I never thought I'd need that knowledge to protect my own kid from a next-door neighbor. That fence. My daughter painted its little lavender flowers as part of her therapy after her mother passed. The tyrant in heels claimed those decorations violated the neutral color palette regulation. My child didn't understand color charts. She only understood that purple reminded her of her mother's favorite garden dress. That board directive wasn't about design. It was another attempt to erase anything that didn't look like her control. I remember thinking, while my daughter pressed trembling fingers against the wooden rail, that maybe I'd waited too long to stop these small humiliations. Karen started with notice letters, lawn edging, mailbox height, fence-stained tone. Then she progressed to verbal warnings in front of neighbors, like she needed an audience. It escalated faster than any reasonable adult would believe. The disturbing part wasn't the rule enforcement. It was how her teenage son watched every encounter with an amused smirk, like he was learning exactly how to intimidate without consequences. And today, that smirk had turned into physical aggression. When he deliberately slammed her into that fence panel, the sound echoed against the manicured sidewalk like wood breaking under a hammer. My heart exploded into my throat, and every training instinct screamed at me to stabilize her neck, check pupils, rule out concussion. Her eyes drifted. The world shifted. Everything felt suddenly slow and dangerous. While the enforcer in crimson argued that physical correction seemed appropriate for repeated boundary violation, I felt my pulse tighten around one cold truth. This wasn't an accident. This was learned behavior, aggression sanitized by parental justification. And that's not just a violation, it's a pipeline. One that ends in the system I know better than anyone. Now, listen carefully. This story doesn't start with retaliation. It starts with restraint. Because if you've ever felt that burn in your chest when someone hurts your child, you know that holding the line might be the hardest battle you ever fight. And if you've ever looked at someone who abuses authority and thought, there will be a day you answer for this, then stay close. If your child has ever been injured or humiliated by someone hiding behind a title, this might be the most important story you hear this year. And if you've ever wished someone would finally hold a person like the board chair accountable, don't move an inch. The next minutes are going to change your expectations of what justice looks like, because Karen Whitlock assumed the HOA shield made her untouchable. She didn't realize that fate had placed the wrong family next door, and her son, who thought fences could cage consequence, was about to learn exactly who signs the paperwork when doors close behind him. I carried my daughter inside, with her cheek pressed against my shoulder, her breathing shallow and uneven, her fingers curled into my shirt like she was afraid the world outside would reach in again. But even as I shut the door, I could hear Karen Whitlock on the sidewalk, loud, theatrical, announcing to the neighbors that I was overreacting to a simple disciplinary redirect. The clipboard queen always had a way of turning her cruelty into a public performance. I laid my daughter on the couch and checked her coordination, slow tracking, delayed responses, pain behind her right eye. Classic concussion markers. As I held a cold pack to her temple, she whispered, "Dad, why did he do that?" And I didn't have an answer I could say aloud. Not yet. because the truth was worse than anything a child her age should hear. He did it because the officer of rules taught him that power comes from enforcement, not empathy. Before I could say anything, the doorbell rang. 3 sharp, rapid presses. Her signature. I opened it just enough to see the tyrant in heels standing there with a printed violation notice already filled out, pen in hand, waiting for me to take it. "This is your formal warning for obstruction of common use pathways," she said, each word clipped, rehearsed. She didn't ask about my daughter. She didn't look past me. She didn't express a single ounce of remorse. "You watched him slam her head first," I said. "And your response is paperwork?" Her lips hardened. "Your child crossed into HOA maintained space. Our guidelines allow corrective measures when minors compromise property integrity." I studied the way she said corrective measures, like she was talking about replanting a shrub, not the human being trembling behind me. "You understand," I said quietly, "that her medical report will determine what happens next." That made the enforcer in crimson blink, not guilt, calculation. She tucked the notice into her folder and shifted her weight, lowering her voice. "Let's not escalate things that don't need escalation, Daniel. Accidents happen. Teens roughhouse." "Teens roughhouse," I replied. "When there's mutual play involved." He stomped her. Hard enough I heard the fence shake. Her eyes flickered. For the first time she didn't have a script prepared, but she still leaned in, whispering, "Be smart. The more noise you make, the harder this becomes. For her. For her. Not for him. Never him." I closed the door in her face, and as the latch clicked, I realized exactly what frightened me. She already believed she had the authority to rewrite what happened. The board chair wasn't just defending her son. She was shaping the narrative before anyone else could speak. That meant she'd escalate, not retreat. When I returned to my daughter, she was holding her backpack, the same one she dropped before all this happened, and tracing the bent corner with her thumb. "Dad, am I in trouble?" she whispered. My chest cracked open. "No, you did nothing wrong, nothing." She nodded, but her shoulders curled inward. Kids sense danger long before adults explain it. She already felt the weight of the clipboard queen's presence, even from inside our home. I needed support, documentation, witnesses, anything that countered the HOA's version. That's when my phone buzzed with a message from someone I hadn't expected. Madison Fry. "I saw what happened. We need to talk." Madison, the treasurer, the quiet one at meetings, the woman who always seemed uncomfortable when Karen barked orders. She rarely spoke, never contradicted, and kept her hands clasped tight like she was afraid of being noticed. But now she reached out first. That meant something. It meant someone else saw the truth, someone who might be ready to step out of the shadow of the officer of rules, if only for a moment. I told my daughter I'd be right back and stepped onto the porch. Across the street, Madison stood beside her mailbox, arms wrapped around her chest, eyes darting like she expected Karen to emerge from the hedges. When she met my gaze, her expression crumpled with guilt, hesitation, and a kind of fear that didn't come from me. She gave one small nod, nervous but determined, and I knew then that whatever story the tyrant in heels was trying to craft, it wasn't airtight, not anymore, because someone on the inside had finally reached for the truth. Madison didn't come closer at first. She stayed, planted on the opposite curb like the concrete under her sandals might split if she stepped toward me, her arms folded tight across her stomach, fingers tugging at the edge of her cardigan sleeve. That nervous gesture alone told me more than any words could. She wasn't just uncomfortable. She was scared of the board chair watching through a window somewhere. I didn't know it would get that bad," she stammered, voice barely above traffic noise. "I thought he'd shove, maybe yell. That's what he usually does." Usually, that single word said everything. I stepped down from the porch just enough to hear her without shouting, but I didn't close the distance either. I didn't want her feeling cornered. "Madison, he stomped her head into steel fencing," I said, keeping my tone steady. There wasn't a second of restraint. Her eyes flickered toward the corner house, the one with the red shutters, the same direction Karen Whitlock always came storming from. "She told the board you allowed your daughter to harass him," she whispered. "She's already preparing her version." Of course she was. The clipboard queen never waited for consequences. She manufactured excuses before victims had time to breathe. I have body cam training, I told Madison quietly. I know exactly what concussion pressure looks like. Her eyes widened slightly. Body cam? I trained officers on medical assessment during field operations, I said. This isn't a slip, it's aggravated assault. She flinched, actually flinched, like just hearing the legal phrasing made her bones rattle. Please, don't say that where she can hear. She's already furious you called emergency services. She said that was provocation. Provocation. In her world, saving a child's life counted as provocation. I didn't get closer, but she did. One step, then another. Like each inch forward was a betrayal she'd pay for. She threatened to file a board-level complaint against me, Madison murmured, fingers twisting her sleeve again. Said I was interfering with behavioral correction. I voted against her taking disciplinary action last month. She calls that insubordination. That confirmed it. This wasn't just an out-of-control mother. It was a tyrant in heels who punished dissent with surgical precision. Anyone who challenged her authority became a target, including her own board members. What do you see? I asked. Her throat tightened, shoulders stiffened. She glanced toward her house, where I could see curtains shift, someone watching. Or maybe she just imagined it. But fear changes perception, and the officer of rules thrived on fear. Madison leaned closer, voice shaking. He wasn't defending himself. She yelled, "Push her back," before he touched your daughter. The world narrowed. My pulse actually paused, dropped, restarted like a faulty engine. She instructed him? I asked. Madison nodded once, tiny, terrified. I heard it clearly, and she swallowed. She filmed it. Filmed, documented, weaponized. Not to report abuse, but to protect her own child. She records everything, Madison whispered. Private footage. She stays outside patrolling and keeps a camera running like she's some neighborhood security force. Which explained the confidence, the reason she didn't panic when violence unfolded in front of half the block. She didn't just expect to rewrite the situation. She already had her evidence curated and controlled. I stared at Madison long enough to recognize the panic building behind her eyes. She was torn clean down the middle, her conscience screaming one direction, her fear yanking her back to submission. You know she'll destroy me if she thinks I helped you, she said, stepping back already. She pushes people out, Daniel, quietly. They don't sell by choice. I held her gaze. You came to me anyway. Her chin trembled, because someone had to. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced down and blanched white. She's calling me, right now. Karen again, watching, tracking movement. She'll know I spoke to you, Madison whispered, backing away already, clutching her phone like a detonator. Please pretend we never talked. I can't. Her voice cracked, and she hurried across the street, almost running, almost crying, because the enforcer in crimson had already tightened the leash around her life. And that was the moment I understood the stakes weren't just my daughter's injury. They were the neighborhood's captivity. The officer of rules had built herself a very quiet empire, and anyone who tried to escape paid for it. I didn't sleep. Not really. I sat at the kitchen table with cold coffee and security footage paused on the exact frame where his shoe left the ground before slamming my daughter against iron rail. The clock ticked toward sunrise, and my hands felt numb, not from shock anymore, from calculation. At 7:12 a.m., the clipboard queen finally made her entrance. She strutted down the sidewalk like nothing on earth could touch her, heels clicking, red blazer angled perfectly, phone held like a badge. She didn't look my direction at first. She made sure every neighbor saw her patrolling. She wanted presence, not privacy. Only when she reached my driveway did she swivel toward me. We need to discuss your daughter's behavior, Karen Whitlock declared, like reading from a prepared statement. Her repeated harassment of residents is documented. Harassment. My daughter had been retrieving a backpack strap caught on fencing. She's in the hospital with cranial trauma, I told her evenly. Your son stomped her skull. Allegedly, she replied, lifting her chin, sunglasses reflecting my house. And only after she attempted physical contact. I stepped closer, just enough for her to hear the steel in my voice. I was a trauma medic with SWAT for 12 years. I know inflicted force when I see it. She didn't flinch, not one fraction. The tyrant in heels just folded her arms deliberately, like she'd rehearsed dominance in a mirror. You've already made reckless decisions calling emergency responders, she lectured, tone dripping with superiority. False reporting against a minor is a prosecutable offense. False reporting. She was laying her defense strategy in real time. Build doubt early. Accuse the victim immediately. I didn't answer. Not yet. Silence is sometimes more lethal than words. She misread that silence as weakness. Your daughter will need to explain why she aggressively initiated contact, Karen continued, voice icy. The board is initiating disciplinary action pending review. I stared at her, long enough for her reflection to show her own arrogance back. Your son isn't the one facing review, I said. But he will be. Her pupils flickered, just barely, and I caught it. A tiny crack in confidence most people would have missed. But I spent years reading micro-reactions and barricaded standoffs. She wasn't fearless. She was performing fearlessness. You're threatening a minor, she hissed, taking half a step back. I'm stating reality. And then, right on cue, 3 neighbors came out for morning errands, keys jingling, dogs tugging leashes. Karen saw them, her posture sharpened instantly, voice lifting enough to broadcast. As vice president of the association, I am obligated to ensure resident safety from disruptive individuals. She wanted an audience. She needed witnesses to the story she wanted recorded. I simply looked at the small dot blinking on my doorbell camera. Quiet reminder I didn't need to shout. Her expression tightened when she noticed. We'll be issuing formal notice, she announced. Expect corrective action. There's already corrective action underway, I answered. Just not the one you think. That landed hard. I saw her throat shift. The officer of rules hadn't expected pushback this early. She expected panic, compliance, or submission. Instead, she got silence wrapped around certainty. She pivoted sharply, walking away with calculated confidence but shoulders a little too rigid, heels clicking sharper than before, like she was stabbing the pavement to regain control. As she turned the corner, I noticed Madison's curtain move across the street. A quick glance, then gone, terrified to be seen, terrified to be aligned with either side. That was when I realized the board wasn't united. It was ruled, a monarchy disguised as community governance. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my brother, standing by, just say when. I typed slowly because strategy requires pacing, not yet. There's more coming, not retaliation, not violence, exposure. Because the enforcer in crimson wasn't just a controlling neighbor. She was orchestrating a cover-up in plain daylight. And the moment sunlight hit everything she'd tried to hide, this entire neighborhood would finally see the truth she built her power on. I didn't expect the discovery to come from pavement dust, but trauma scenes always leave the truth behind if you know where to look. Years in tactical medicine trained my eyes to read impact patterns better than most detectives, and as I replayed the footage frame by frame that night, one detail froze my breathing. The angle of her fall wasn't initiated by a shove. It was a downward slam, which meant force was applied from above, not forward. That single fact changed everything. By morning, the board chair was already canvassing driveways, whispering to neighbors about misconduct allegations against my daughter. But while Karen Whitlock was obsessively shaping a narrative, she overlooked something her son hadn't. Scrape direction. On concrete, impact tells a story. I returned to the sidewalk where her head struck. Most people just see a scuffed gray slab. I see a timeline, and there, just inches from the fence post, dust streaked backward, not sideways. Sign of a heel drag pinning her down. Not accidental, not mutual contact. Pinned. My chest tightened with the realization that my daughter had fought to breathe through that pressure. I took photos quietly, no confrontation, no raised voice. Silence is tactical. Of course, the clipboard queen spotted me immediately. She exited her driveway with a purposeful swing, phone already recording, as if that alone granted legal superiority. "Ethan," she called, stepping closer. "The association doesn't authorize residents to tamper with grounds after an incident investigation." Tamper. She was framing my own sidewalk as her controlled territory. "I'm documenting injuries from a felony assault," I said simply, kneeling again. "There's no confirmed felony," she snapped, red blazer flickering under morning sun. "Only conflicting statements. Witnesses saw your daughter lunging." I didn't rise. "Which witnesses?" She noticeably hesitated. Too long, a second too long, enough to betray she had none. But the officer of rules recovered quickly. Board privacy protects complainants, she said, chin angled with manufactured authority. I continued photographing. Her heels clicked beside me, sharp, impatient. You're escalating community tension, she warned. This neighborhood isn't equipped for violent accusations. I finally looked up at her. Violence happened. I'm equipped for that. That line hit her harder than anything else had. SWAT training was a liability to her fabricated version of safety. The board is issuing a neighborhood advisory, she declared, stating that your daughter provoked an altercation and may pose behavioral risks. Every syllable ignited a new vein of fury beneath my ribs. She's unconscious in a neuro wing, I said evenly. She hasn't provoked anything. The enforcer in crimson folded her arms. Medical exaggeration doesn't change community conduct expectations. My jaw clenched. Her detachment wasn't ignorance. It was strategy. She wasn't denying injury. She was discrediting the victim. Before I could respond, I saw something that made my breath stall. A fragment of fabric, caught between fence posts, blue denim with a broken stitch, my daughter's jacket fabric, torn downward, not sideways. Meaning she'd been yanked and slammed, not pushed. There was my discovery, not documents, not hearsay. Physical evidence left by violence itself. I pulled a glove from my pocket, a habit I never broke since tactical field work, and carefully sealed the fragment in a sterile bag. Karen's voice sharpened with panic, not confidence. You're collecting personal material from association property without board clearance. I stood slowly. This belongs to my daughter. It's community-installed fencing, she countered. It's DNA-bearing fabric, I replied. Her lips tightened. The tyrant in heels wasn't worried about fencing ownership. She was terrified what forensic analysts could confirm. As I walked away, I sent a silent message through air she didn't understand yet. Some fights don't require force, only patience. My phone vibrated. Madison, the conflicted treasurer. I need to talk, not here, not here. Meaning fear was cracking through loyalty. I texted back one word: tonight. Exposure doesn't start in courtrooms. It starts in tiny truths. Villains never imagined someone would know how to read. Madison's message kept replaying in my head long after midnight, echoing through the quiet house like a warning only someone in her position could give. A conflicted witness doesn't reach out unless pressure gets unbearable. Or guilt does. And the tremble in her text, "not here," meant Karen Whitlock's shadow reached deeper than HOA rules or suburban gossip. It meant fear. By morning, I understood why. A printed violation notice hung on my front door. Aggressive font, capitalized "failure to control minor," stamped with the HOA seal as if this neighborhood bureaucracy suddenly had jurisdiction over medical trauma. My stomach tightened. They were manufacturing liability against my daughter to shield their own. The clipboard queen wasn't just covering her son. She was pre-building a defense strategy. I removed the notice slowly, scanning language designed to sound official. Reckless play, aggressive conduct, instigated physical contact. Every sentence flipped blame. Every phrase implied she was the threat. No police report ever used those words. Karen wrote them herself. Then I noticed something new. Fine print citing multiple prior concerns documented by board officers. Multiple prior concerns. There had never been one. Those words meant fabricated history. Once lies appear in official letters, they become community memory. That was the moment everything shifted for me. This wasn't petty enforcement. This was character assassination. I walked toward the black iron entrance gate, our neighborhood's symbol of safety, and stared at it under morning haze, feeling more like a prison barrier than protection. My daughter's backpack scrape still marked the concrete beside it, like a permanent bruise on pavement. The tyrant in heels pulled up in her SUV just as I took photos. Of course she did. Timing is a weapon for people like her. "You're intimidating residents by documenting restricted zones," she called out, stepping from the vehicle as if emerging onto a courtroom floor she controlled. "Restricted?" I asked calmly, keeping the camera steady. "Association easement," she announced. "Photography requires board clearance." I lowered the phone. "You're inventing legal authority, again." Her eyes flickered, brief panic, then rehearsed poise. "You're escalating this beyond community management," she warned. "You slammed a child into a fence," I said quietly. "Escalation already happened." She lifted her chin. "There are 2 written statements confirming your daughter struck first." There it was, planted testimony, manufactured, probably coached. My pulse slowed, SWAT calm taking over. "Written by who?" "Board privacy," she repeated, identical to last time, but quicker, meaning rehearsed. "What time were those statements submitted?" That landed harder than I expected. She hesitated, like someone who hadn't thought I'd question timestamps. Her mask slid for a split second before she covered it with disdain. "The board won't tolerate harassment," the officer of rules declared, voice tightening. "I'm issuing a motion to restrict your daughter from all common areas pending review." Pending review, a mother's favorite phrase when she's pretending victimhood. "You'll restrict her from lying in a hospital bed too?" A muscle along her jaw twitched. Fear, not compassion, moved behind her eyes. I continued photographing, but now with a different purpose. Not evidence of injury, proof of the harassment itself. Just then, a patrol car rolled to the gate. I expected support. Instead, the officer stepped out, expression already shaped by someone else's version of events. "Sir," he said cautiously, "we got a complaint of aggressive behavior from this address." From this address, meaning her, again. Karen folded her arms triumphantly. The cop glanced between us. "We just need to ask a few questions." I stared at him, letting silence speak for me, until the weight of it made him shift uncomfortably. "You're standing on public easement," I said evenly. "You don't need board permission to enforce state assault statutes." The officer blinked, processing. Karen cut in. Sharply, "Officer, this man has a history of inflaming." "Stop," I said, calm. "Do you have a report from the hospital?" He looked confused, because of course no one from her narrative wanted medical verification. "Call pediatric neuro at Fairfax," I said steadily. "They'll give you accuracy." The cop hesitated, and in that hesitation, Karen's control cracked. She needed law enforcement to be her weapon, not a neutral presence. When he finally walked back to his cruiser to make the call, she exhaled sharply, mask slipping. "You're not as powerful as you think," she muttered. I stepped closer, voice low and steady. "Karen, you really don't know who my family is." Her eyes narrowed, uncertain. "Good. Fear is the first fracture in tyranny." The tremor in Madison Fry's hand was the first thing I noticed when she stepped through my garage side door that evening. She didn't speak right away. She just looked back toward the street 3 separate times, like a hunted animal, checking escape paths. Conflicted witnesses don't randomly visit. They arrive only when whatever they've seen becomes too heavy to carry alone. She clutched an iPad against her chest like body armor. "I can't stay long," she whispered. The moment she said those words, I understood exactly how deep Karen Whitlock's intimidation campaign had cut through this community. The clipboard queen didn't rule through policy. She ruled through fear. Madison set the device on my workbench, screen face down, like she wasn't sure showing me would break federal law. "I shouldn't be doing this," she breathed. "But I also can't not." I stayed silent. Letting witnesses talk without interruption always reveals the truth quicker than interrogation does. She finally flipped the screen. A pause security feed filled the display. Sidewalk, fence, my daughter, and the exact second Karen's teenage son shoved her hard enough that her neck snapped backward against wrought iron. I felt something inside me go cold. "Where did you get this?" I asked quietly. Madison swallowed hard. "The board rings doorbells and asks for camera access whenever they want to verify landscaping violations. But they screen what they pull. They delete anything that could expose certain board families." "Expose Karen," I said. The officer of rules name hung in the air like poison. Madison nodded reluctantly. She marked this file as personal safety matter, do not archive, which is code for delete before anyone sees it. I stared at the feed again. My daughter's terrified eyes an instant before impact. Every protective instinct in me screamed, but years of SWAT medical discipline kept my exterior calm. "This is evidence of felony assault," I said. Madison's breath stuttered. I know. Her fear wasn't theatrical. It was lived. the hesitation in her shoulders, the way she kept listening for footsteps. Outside, the tremble only people hiding truth carry. It all told me she wanted to do what's right, but Karen's retaliation history was long. "What made you bring this now?" I asked. Madison swallowed so sharply I could hear it. "Because the board chair. She told the officer this afternoon that your daughter lunged first. She said you've trained her to provoke conflict because of your military background, and the police wrote it down." There it was, the planted narrative. The same manufactured script the enforcer in Crimson had been building since the moment she printed that violation notice. Madison leaned closer, voice barely audible. "If the board can spin this against you, with your training, what chance does anyone else have?" Fear wasn't the only thing pushing her. It was moral breaking point. Then she did something I didn't expect. She handed me a small USB device from her purse. "Backup copy," she whispered. "She doesn't know I pulled it before they wiped the server." This was the crucial help Part 7 demanded. The moment the conflicted witness finally crossed the line from silence to action. I locked eyes with her. "I know what this costs you." She shook her head quickly. "Don't say that. If she finds out, if anyone knows I gave this, she'll invent a reason to remove me from my home. She's done it before." My jaw tightened. "Madison, you're protected now." Her eyes flicked up, confused. That's when I finally said it. "My brother oversees juvenile detention admissions statewide." She froze, realization spreading slowly across her face. "So, if her son ever harms another child," I continued, voice calm but surgical, "he won't cycle through juvenile court like past incidents. He'll go exactly where he belongs." Madison exhaled like someone finally believing escape existed. She backed toward the door, whispering, "Please make this stop." "I will." Not a threat, a promise. Just before she left, she looked straight into my eyes, this time without fear, and said, "Karen thinks she controls this neighborhood. She doesn't know who she's dealing with." I watched her disappear into the night, clutching her purse like evidence of her own courage. And in that moment, I realized the tyrant in heels had finally made her first real mistake. She forced someone decent to turn against her. Madison's taillights disappeared past the cul-de-sac turn, and I stood alone in my garage, palm closed around the tiny USB that suddenly felt heavier than anything I'd carried in combat. Evidence is only power when placed in front of the right eyes, but the board chair had spent years making sure no eyes ever looked in the right direction. If I handled this through normal HOA channels, Karen Whitlock would bury it before sunrise. So, I didn't go inside. I walked straight to the side gate and crossed into my backyard, where 3 former SWAT teammates were grilling, off-duty, and half unaware they were about to become part of something they never signed up for. The moment they saw my expression, the laughter dropped. "Tell me that isn't what I think it is," Colt muttered, setting down his drink. "Her son?" Ray asked. "Caught on camera," I said quietly, and the clipboard queen already destroyed the official feed. Ray's jaw clenched. I watched muscles in his neck tighten the way they used to, right before breaching orders. "She deleted evidence of a felony assault," he said. "That's obstruction." "Yes," I replied. "And that's her pattern." I set the device on the patio table. The officer of rules probably believes she could erase digital truth the same way she erased violation complaints from families she pushed out years before. But SWAT teams run on documentation and chain of evidence. We know exactly how fragile cover-ups really are. Ray was the first to speak. "You want this to go through your brother?" "Not yet," I told him. "We go through official police channels like civilians. We build a record before anyone accuses me of military intimidation." Colt gave me that look he always gave when he knew I was planning 10 moves ahead. "So, what's step 1? We prepare for public exposure, not retaliation." But saying that out loud didn't make the rage settle. Every time I blinked, I saw my daughter's head slam against metal. Just then, headlights rolled slow past the fence line. White SUV, tinted windows. The enforcer in Crimson liked surveillance drives at night. She called them community safety checks. My team noticed immediately. Years of training doesn't just disappear. "She's circling again?" Colt said quietly. "Probably checking to see if I'm obedient," I answered. Ray stepped closer. "She trying to intimidate SWAT operators at a barbecue? Good luck with that." I shook my head. "That's the danger. If we confront her directly, she turns us into the threat. She's already selling that story. We all watched the SUV crawl around the loop like she was patrolling territory she believed she owned. When the vehicle disappeared, I turned toward the patio table. We're using her arrogance against her. She thinks she controls the narrative. We make the narrative public. Ray leaned forward slowly, almost reverently. You want statements from us? I do. Off-duty civilian statements as eyewitnesses, admissible and irrefutable. Colt nodded. And we include the part where she tried to intimidate us tonight. Yes. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Ray said something none of us expected. Ethan, I'll give my full name on record. If she thinks she can bully families, she's about to learn what actual accountability looks like. My throat tightened. You sure? He nodded. Brother, your kid almost lost her life. I won't stand quiet. And right then, like she'd been summoned by the whisper of truth, the tyrant in heels herself stepped onto my front walkway. We saw her through the fence gap, clipboard tucked beneath one arm, long red jacket like she thought she was marching into Congress instead of trespassing onto private property. She knocked twice, sharp, authoritative, like she expected obedience. Colt muttered, That woman has a death wish. Ray whispered, Stay seated, no confrontation, make her make the mistake. But I didn't move, I didn't answer. I let her knock again and again, until her confidence cracked enough to speak through the doorbell camera. I know you're home, she said, voice dripping superiority. We need to discuss your daughter's disciplinary consequences following her provocation incident earlier today. Provocation. My fists curled so tight my nails bit my palm. Ray reached out and put a steadying hand on my arm. Ethan? Not yet. I forced a breath through my teeth. She has no idea what's coming, I whispered, because now, for the first time, the clipboard queen wasn't the only one watching. She was being watched back. Karen Whitlock's silhouette finally disappeared from my porch camera, but the echo of her absurd accusation, disciplinary consequences, kept replaying like some twisted parody. When the feed cut back to the patio view, my teammates were already standing, quietly gathering cups and folding chairs, instinctively preparing for something bigger than a backyard dinner. Years of SWAT conditioning does that. When danger shifts, bodies respond automatically. I need your statements tonight, I said. Ray nodded. We'll write them before we leave. We headed inside, and I pulled out my laptop on the kitchen island, typing up the incident timeline while they recorded individual eyewitness accounts. Every keystroke felt like reclaiming something she'd tried to rip away from us. And the whole time, the officer of rules kept showing up on the doorbell history, pacing the curb like she owned oxygen. When Madison Fry suddenly texted, my breath hitched. Do not let her inside. She tried to access board email tonight. Something's wrong. I wrote back, Did she see the footage? Yes, she's panicking. Be careful. My pulse thudded slower, heavier. Panic meant fear. Fear meant leverage. I leaned toward Ray. She knows someone has the real video. Good, he said. Let her drown in paranoia. Colt added his signature and closed his laptop. File these with county police, not HOA. No chain of suppression. I nodded, but I didn't send them yet. Not until I had the final piece. We needed a witness who shook on camera, whose eyes told the truth, even before their words did. Someone like Madison. But she wouldn't crack in front of the clipboard queen. She'd only crack in front of a conscience. So I asked her to meet me, neutral territory, the community park under soft streetlights, where families usually felt safe. When I arrived, she was already there, arms folded tight over her chest like she was trying to hold her ribs in place. She isn't sleeping tonight, Madison whispered instantly, like her voice had been waiting hours to escape. The board chair demanded I delete backup files. I pretended they were already gone. You shouldn't be talking to me out here, I warned. You're right, she agreed, staring down at the mulch, voice trembling. But you're also the only one actually doing something. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rustle of nearby trees sounded too loud, too exposed. Madison swallowed hard. You know he meant to hurt her, right? He pushed her on purpose, hard. I exhaled through clenched teeth. I know, I saw the impact angle. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. The board thinks they can bury this, but Karen and her son crossed a line tonight that can't be crossed back. I stepped closer, keeping my voice steady. I'm going public with this. Media, social platforms, school district, police oversight, a full chain reaction. Madison took a shaky breath. You'll win. But she's unpredictable when cornered. The enforcer in crimson doesn't accept defeat. She makes everyone else pay for it. And what about the community? I asked. Will they stay silent knowing what she allowed? Madison's voice broke. They already are. I watched neighbors peel blinds open tonight, staring, then closing them again. Fear is contagious. Silence is obedience. And HOA tyrants thrive in quiet neighborhoods. I pulled up the footage on my phone, the moment her son slammed my daughter into cold metal, and Madison covered her mouth. Tears blurred her glasses. She's 14, Madison whispered shakily. How could that monster? That was it. The moment her loyalty snapped, not to me, but to humanity. Will you attest this was intentional? I asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded, once like her neck weighed 100 pounds. Yes, I'll testify. My lungs loosened for the first time since the incident. The tyrant in heels had spent years suffocating dissent. But tonight, something shifted. Not a victory, not yet, but a fracture. Madison stepped back like she'd said too much already. I'll send a statement tomorrow morning, from a private device, not HOA servers. Take your time, I assured her. Just stay safe. As she walked away, the park lights flickered behind her, and for the first time, Karen Whitlock felt small, because the moment a witness stops obeying, an empire built on fear begins to crumble. Madison's promise replayed in my head the entire walk home, but promises meant nothing unless they were turned into pressure, and pressure required exposure. Karen Whitlock spent years weaponizing silence. Tonight, silence wasn't on the menu. The next morning, I made coffee like it was any other day, but my kitchen looked more like a tactical command post than a home. 3 laptops open, evidence folders sorted, timestamps highlighted, 3 sworn statements from off-duty SWAT officers drafted and ready. And the clipboard queen didn't know a single file had left neighborhood hands. I uploaded the video to a secure cloud, then created a public access link, set to private for now, but just knowing it existed tightened my spine. All I needed was validation from one neutral witness. Someone who couldn't be called biased. Madison Fry's official statement would be that fuse. Right as I hit save, my doorbell chimed again. I checked the porch cam. Not the clipboard queen this time. A different HOA board member. Nervous posture, hands shoved in pockets, no scripted arrogance. He wasn't here to threaten. He was here to read the battlefield. I stepped outside, shutting the door behind me. He cleared his throat. Ethan, look. I don't know what she told you, but Karen's saying your daughter trespassed across easement property last night. That this was provoked. I stared at him, silent. Let the weight of that lie hang there like gravity. Provoked? I repeated quietly. A 14-year-old picking up her own backpack provoked a skull injury? He shifted uncomfortably, then finally mumbled, Some of us don't agree with how she handled it. There it was, splintering. The officer of rules can't control this narrative anymore, I said. He blinked hard, turned, and left without another word. His shoulders didn't match his footsteps. He looked smaller, walking away. Minutes later, I got a text from Madison. Board meeting changed to tonight. Emergency vote scheduled. She's panicking. Emergency vote. That meant damage control, or cover-up. Probably both. I called Ray immediately. I need 2 cameras, small, concealed. You'll have 4, he replied. SWAT brothers don't ask why, they ask where. By 6 p.m., I was standing outside the HOA clubhouse. Artificial brick, overbright lobby lights, fake frame certificates screaming legitimacy they didn't earn. I walked past strangers, pretending they suddenly didn't know my name, pretending their lawn chair evenings weren't built on neighbor fear and board politics. Inside, the tyrant in heels sat at the long table like she was prepping her coronation. A red blazer, tight smile, controlled breathing. She wasn't confident, she was performing confidence. When she spoke, her voice rang through the room like a gavel. Due to last night's unfortunate misunderstanding, I cut her off. Misunderstanding? A few people gasped. She hadn't expected interruption, especially not from me. That footage says intentional assault, I continued. Let's use real language tonight. Her lips twitched, but she didn't break character. That video is incomplete and unauthorized. It's backed up to external servers, I replied. Multiple, including law enforcement review. Silence froze the room. I saw shoulders stiffen. A single cough echoed like thunder. Karen tried to reclaim the floor, voice sharper now. The board will determine disciplinary actions. I took out a hard drive and placed it gently on the middle of the table. You'll determine nothing until the county prosecutor views this file, and I strongly suggest you stop pretending you control the outcome. No shouting, just precision. The enforcer in crimson opened her mouth, then closed it again. The first real sign she understood she'd lost control. Madison, sitting 3 seats down, kept her eyes lowered, hands shaking slightly. But she didn't look away this time. She didn't flinch when I placed evidence in the spotlight. Something in the room cracked, first in silence, then in the eyes of neighbors who realized they'd backed the wrong queen. Tonight wasn't victory, but it was the beginning of her public unraveling, because when a dictator finally meets evidence stronger than fear, every empire built on intimidation begins to crumble under the weight of truth. The HOA clubhouse wasn't supposed to feel like a courtroom, but by the time neighbors filled those folding chairs, it looked exactly like one. Cameras, mine and theirs, were rolling, and Karen Whitlock walked in like she'd already planned her closing statement. That red blazer practically announced her title louder than any agenda sheet ever could. She strutted toward the board table, chin elevated, voice dripping with entitlement as she greeted the room. The clipboard queen didn't just run meetings, she choreographed them. Micro pauses before speaking, dramatic flips of paperwork. A fake gracious smile for anyone who dared meet her eye. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, tonight's discussion concerns an unfortunate misunderstanding that has escalated beyond reason. I stood before she could continue. Escalated? Your son slammed my child's head into a fence. Collective inhale. The tension was audible. Karen pretended she wasn't affected. Your daughter entered restricted easement space. There's no easement restriction on public sidewalks, I replied. But you already knew that before you weaponized your position. The tyrant in heels straightened her spine, lifted her chin an inch. Her posture screamed challenge. Good. I didn't come here to politely observe injustice. I came to rip its mask off in front of every witness she depended on. She motioned toward a projector. Before rumors cause damage to this community, we'll review the incident from a neutral perspective, security footage maintained by the HOA. A clip appeared, grainy, cropped intentionally wide, carefully angled to hide contact. I heard neighbors whispering, doubting. That was exactly how she intended it. Misinformation wasn't sloppy. It was strategic. When the manipulated video ended, Karen folded her arms, victorious. Clearly an accident, she declared. I tapped a button on my phone. Another screen lit up, my footage, clear, close, unfiltered. Gasps rippled down every row as Karen's son shoved my daughter, then slammed her head against metal bars. Her scream echoed across that clubhouse like it was happening again. Karen bolted upright. Turn that off! That is unauthorized! I stepped toward the center of the room. That footage has already been sent to county juvenile intake, I said, letting every syllable land like a hammer drop. My brother works there. He didn't even need me to ask. Shock landed like lightning through the space. Neighbors stared at her the way people stare at collapsing houses. They couldn't look away. The officer of rules tried reassembling her voice. This community doesn't tolerate threats of legal retaliation. This community doesn't tolerate violence toward children, I cut in. But you expect us to pretend fear equals authority? Not anymore. A mother in the front row stood up. My kid was chased into the clubhouse hallway by that boy last year. You made us apologize. Then another father. He threatened my son outside the pool. You told us he was expressing frustrations. Karen spun toward the board. We need order. No one listened, not anymore. She slammed her folder closed. We are concluding this meeting. No, I replied, voice steady. You don't get to walk away from accountability. Neighbors stepped toward me, physically aligning behind the truth. Their silence became support. Their presence became a verdict. Karen's once loyal followers suddenly saw a leader built entirely out of intimidation, cracking from the inside out. When she attempted to leave, half the room blocked the exit, politely but firmly. I met her eyes. You covered for him. You knew what he was capable of. For the first time, she didn't fire back, didn't threaten, didn't posture. She simply backed up, one step, like the ground beneath her was gone. This wasn't a meeting anymore. This was exposure. And exposure is something monsters survive only when people keep looking away. But tonight, the whole neighborhood was finally staring straight at her. Karen Whitlock didn't speak another word as the room dissolved into murmurs, but I could feel her eyes burning across the floor, like she still believed glare counted as authority. It didn't. Not anymore. As neighbors continued confronting her with stories she'd buried for years, she clutched that red binder like it held the last scraps of control she hadn't lost yet. The clipboard queen looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Every polished gesture she built her reign on suddenly felt desperate, frantic, almost childish. She wasn't protecting the community. She'd been protecting the image of a perfect rule-bound kingdom she never deserved to lead. I left the clubhouse with people following, me out, parents, grandparents, shaking their heads like someone had ripped open curtains that had been closed for a decade. My daughter leaned into my side, fragile but breathing steady, and that alone felt like a victory already earned, no matter what came next. Outside, night air felt clean. For once. My phone buzzed, my brother again. County juvenile intake has officially filed review, he texted. Multiple prior complaints about him already exist. Multiple. Prior complaints. No one should ever need more than one. Days followed like slow thunder. The enforcer in crimson retreated from public view. No HOA emails, no violation letters, no threats typed at midnight like she usually preferred. Silence became her only defense. But silence in a community full of mothers becomes a megaphone. Little by little, families stepped out of fear. One neighbor recorded a statement for the county. Another submitted screenshots of threatening messages Karen had sent years ago. Then more, then more. I didn't have to lead them anymore. They were pushing forward themselves. One afternoon, HOA-wide announcement, Karen Whitlock has temporarily stepped down from board duties. Temporarily. The tyrant in heels loved that word. But neighbors weren't buying it. Petitions swirled. Motions to remove her permanently spread like wildfire. Someone forwarded me a message thread from a private Facebook group where her closest friends admitted they were tired of defending behavior nobody could justify anymore. Even the officer of rules can't rewrite law when the public finally reads it. During a city review meeting I attended online, a council member asked for my daughter's medical update. My voice caught because for the first time, I wasn't explaining something awful. She's recovering, I said. Slowly, but recovering. That call ended, but something inside me didn't. Every choice I'd made up to that moment replayed through my mind. Calling emergency services, documenting every violation, refusing intimidation, gathering testimony instead of reacting emotionally. Every instinct I learned in tactical work told me, retaliation destroys innocence. Exposure protects future children. Weeks later, Karen resigned entirely. Official email, no apology. We didn't need one. The truth was, apology enough. Her son entered juvenile intake review under supervised evaluation, and for the first time since that fence, I slept through the night without waking to check if my daughter was still breathing normally. And you know what surprised me most? Madison Fry, the conflicted witness, sent flowers to my doorstep. I should have spoken sooner, the card read. Thank you for speaking when I couldn't. I thought about every mother who carried fear because someone powerful convinced her she should. I thought about every teenager who hid injuries because an HOA official insisted the family must have provoked it. This wasn't just my win. It belonged to every family who ever questioned themselves because a bully convinced them fear was the same as compliance. Standing in my driveway at dusk, watching porch lights flick on like tiny declarations of peace, I realized something I didn't understand months ago. Control isn't power, fear isn't leadership, and silence, especially from witnesses, can be broken by a single voice refusing to lower its volume anymore. My daughter's hand slipped into mine. Small fingers, steady pulse. Are we safe now? She whispered. I knelt beside her. We're safer, I said. But we're safer because we didn't stay quiet. And if you've ever watched someone try to crush your family beneath rules, titles, or fake authority, hit the subscribe button now and tell me where you're watching from, because this story isn't isolated, and your voice might be the next one that saves someone else's child.